Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed, brought to you by EverAg. This is your weekly news feed for all things grain and all things feed. Each week we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives from an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping dairy and livestock producers manage their risk. I'm your host, Jim Matthews, reporting from the Chicago office on what has been a very wet week here in Chicago and much of the Midwest. And as we all know here in the Midwest, in April, it can be sunny, it can be rainy, a little bit of hail, a little bit of snow, all in a 24-hour period. And Jake, you were with us here this week in Chicago to experience all of that lovely weather. So let's introduce you, Jake, now back home in Texas, Director of Feed Procurement, Mr. Jake Kingsley. And from Michigan, dairy broker and agent, the host of EverAg's critically acclaimed Tech Talk. You know him as the brain from McBain, Mr. Cody Koster. Team, how are we today?
Quite well this morning, Jim. Glad to be back in 70-degree Texas.
Sure. Yeah, I bet. Well, it was nice having you here in Chicago. It was a pleasure. And just for the viewers to know, we had a big collaboration session here in Chicago amongst the EverAg community, talking about how some of our awesome software products might be able to help some of our folks on farm. Very excited about that. But Jake, running the feed squad here, what did you think of the meetings in Chicago?
I think they were great. We were all of the problems to their solutions.
Amen, brother. We usually are, aren't we? We usually are. Cody, how are things in Michigan? Should we start singing Judy Garland now, or you want to save it?
Well, they're doing really well, Jim. I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. And your theme song from Judy Garland, if you just want to go ahead and kick that off.
I will let you take it over.
We'll catch you at the end of the show.
Is that the Wizard of Oz?
Michigan? No, she's from that, but
okay.
This is different.
Different one. All right.
Fred Astaire, right? Easter Parade for everyone at home that's a big Judy Garland fan. Easter Parade. Tune into that one. It's a good one. In the meantime, Paige, if you would kindly timestamp the broadcast, it is Thursday morning in Chicago. It's been a full week since the USDA reports heading into the Easter holiday weekend, in which we had that also critically acclaimed planting report from the USDA, in which they gave us that lower than anticipated corn acreage number. And Jake, you're going to touch on this here in a bit. We saw that really nice pop in futures on Thursday. We thought, hey, maybe going into that 3-day weekend, what's this going to do for the corn market? We've since pulled this back a little bit. We're essentially trading right where we were just before that report came out last week. So we've got May corn futures just hovering above 433 this morning. We've got new crop December just above 470. We have old crop beans trading at 1175. That's in the red this morning for May beans. November just under 1180, also down about a nickel. We've got soybean meal, that stubborn little byproduct. Old crop is hovering at 330 for May, and December at 341.50. So we have seen the protein markets also maintain this lower, just maybe sideways momentum. Not a whole lot from that report to give a lot of love and a lot of spark for the protein markets. But before we start diving too far into grain and feed, the brain from McBain, Cody Koster, there's been a lot happening in the milk markets in terms of chatter. There's a lot of chatter out there, a lot of speculation, right? Maybe there's a little illness floating around, but we're not doctors.
Right.
I'm not a veterinarian.
Nope.
So we're not going to comment on that said illness today. I'm sure everyone's got their bingo cards, right? They're looking for the key buzzwords in today's shows to play their bingo later of bird, flu, avian, mammal, right? You can start checking off all these boxes. Not going to get them on this show, are we, Cody?
Not today.
We're talking markets.
We are.
We're talking markets. So what's happening in the dairy markets here this morning?
I think failing out of vet school twice, I am probably not the one who needs to talk about the bird flu. So we will leave that to the professionals. But I think the big talk of the town lately, Jim, has been the discrepancy between class 3 and class 4. You've got almost a $4.50, maybe $5 widespread Class 4 over Class 3 right now. And a big part of leading into that is we've got butter at $2.94 on spot, and you've got cheese at about $1.44.5 right now. And right at this moment, people are going to say, well, we've seen milk production come down lower. You've got all these problems happening in the South and spreading to different states. It's got to turn around. It's got to pick back up. And right now, we're just hearing that these exports on the cheese front are just not there. Now, that entails cheese, dry whey, which are big components of the Class 3 side. There's going to be people that make the argument that we have probably seen lower Class 3 prices because of the dry whey price heading a little bit lower. And I will say, I had the pleasure of having John Spainhour on the GDT podcast, the Global Dairy Trade podcast from this past Tuesday, where their prices were pretty well elevated and ours kind of stayed the same and headed, on the trickle downward side. And he made a great point on there that I think a lot of people forget about. He said cheese, non-fat, and whey are big commodities that we have that need to be exported. For our prices to be better, we need to export those commodities. And butter, it doesn't really matter. Butter, we are more of a domestic commodity on that side. And I think that's why you're seeing such a high price in butter right now, is the demand is just there. It's just people want butter and we need cream and everything that goes into butter. He made mention of, if global dairy trade, if prices around the world keep going higher and ours kind of stay stagnant and we get those export orders on top of the domestic demand, we could see some very high butter prices that are correlating to the Class 4. But right now, it's just everyone's talking about how can this discrepancy be happening? If we go back to the times of COVID, we were flip-flopped, right? You had cheese, you had Class 3 at $24, $25. You had Class 4 down at $16, $17, and now it's inverted itself. And there's just a lot of wonder when these cheese prices are going to pick back up. A lot of it is going to be exports. How well can we export? How much can we get exported off? If you look out in the futures curve right now, you've got May Class 3 at $15.81, and you go a little further out into November, and we're sitting at $18.20. If we can get that futures curve down a little bit more, there's probably a higher likelihood that we get those exports booked and taken out of country. But until that happens, it's just kind of status quo. We're sitting here every day kind of wondering what is going to take place, what's going to happen. And lately, there's been a lot of cheese trades, right? When we get down to this 140 number, we usually rally pretty hard back into $1.60, maybe $1.65. And then we kind of play the roller coaster game, right? It's up and down and it's up and down. But down here, we have a lot of trades happening on the CME. And we're hoping to take some more of that off the plate and hopefully get those exports booked.
Okay. And in terms of the export market, obviously the U.S. dollar itself then is a big decision factor in terms of the international market purchasing product from the U.S. This is something that Jake and I have to watch very closely as well. And, leading up to, let's say, I think the Easter holiday and maybe the first trading day or so of this week, and we've seen the U.S. dollar on a pretty nice run. We've seen that, since pull back now in just the last few days. For the most part, you take a bigger step back, just looking at the charts. I mean, the dollar's been fairly trapped within a range for the last, let's say, year plus. It hasn't done a whole lot. We've had a few moments where I thought we were going to break this thing out one way or another, but generally compared to like end of late 2020, early 21, still significantly elevated. And of course, that elevated dollar is a bit of a headwind for the international market purchasing product from us. So just something that we have to keep in mind on both sides of the dairy market, the feed impact, but also the dairy products themselves and how they're exported out. Cody, in terms of this discrepancy over Class 4 milk and Class 3 milk, the way you are managing risk for folks, have there been different attitudes for those in each of those markets and how they're managing their milk price risk?
There has been. I mean, if you're coming from a cheese state, purely cheese co-ops, cheese companies, obviously you're not going to have a whole lot of Class 4 on there, but some of these states, Midwest, you got Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, parts of California that have butter churns in state and are being paid that way. Obviously, it's looking a lot more advantageous to go the Class 4 route right now. But we don't want to get people sleeping on the Class 3 side, especially with futures, like I had mentioned, being that much higher going out forward into the end of this year. You look at July through December, you're averaging about $18 right now. And a lot of folks are going to say, well, cost of production is up. You got a lot of other outside playing factors that are coming into what is costing on farm, and we understand. But at the same time, there's no rules that say we have to go higher from here. There's just not, right? So being proactive and looking at farther out months and trying to get coverage on, using insurance, using the CME is something that we've definitely been advocating for. And as far as the class 4 side, I mean, $20, $21, I think those are numbers that most everyone can probably make money at in this day and age. So it's definitely focusing on the class 4 right now. Even if we get a little bit of a run higher, still watching that market and just being very careful on the way that we're going about hedging both of these markets at this point.
Okay, understood. Thanks for that, Cody. I love the line, right? We don't have to go higher. Like, just turning over to Jake, we're watching these grain and feed markets. I think our sentiments, longer term have been fairly bearish. And if you are a grain and feed buyer as a dairy, we've been asking folks to be relatively patient and flexible when it comes to purchasing feed. But as we know, the market doesn't have to go lower, right? And we get something like the USDA report last week where suddenly we do get a little pop in the corn market. And we don't want folks getting too complacent in how they do or do not manage risk against their feed positions. Has anything changed for you, Jake, in the last week in terms of what you've seen from that report and how the markets have reacted since that report?
We've had a little bit of a short week here between recordings, so not a ton of material change as of yet, but we are starting to see maybe some of the first signs of that turn in the cash market we've been talking about and preaching a little bit of patience to wait and see if we could get there. I think you couldn't have drawn it up better on the corn futures board last week post report. We saw a significant rally, and I know a lot of our folks that help grain producers manage risk saw orders fill and corn be sold into the commercial pipeline on that jump higher in corn price without basis having to do much moving at all. So now there's corn flowing into the pipeline. Basis is still steady, but then we saw futures fall right back in line with where they had been kind of pre-report, as you stated earlier. I think that sort of pricing activity is exactly what we need to potentially see basis start to decline as we move into the summer months, right? We've been talking about how do you get this corn to move to market without it negatively affecting the end user? And we're seeing it right now. I think we'll probably see another little lull in grain movement with the kind of sloppy wet weather you guys have had. And then these folks will get out and get to planting. But it has now been accounted for. It's on the books with the feed mills, the elevators that load these shuttles and barges to move it out of the Midwest. And it feels like now it's just a matter of time. We've checked off another box there. Something that we have seen that I think maybe the first sign of real movement would be more on the soybean meal front. We've seen some places in the West have basis numbers for April through September come down $10 or $15 a ton for a forward contract. And that's about as much as we've been kind of thinking you could squeeze out of it in a best case scenario. Really, those numbers are sitting right there in what I would call the historically average range. So at this point, I wouldn't be afraid if you're in one of those markets to step in and get some basis booked up. If you want to set some targets for futures to price out those contracts, should we see another little breakdown in meal futures in the April-September window, I think now's a good time to step in and do a little bit of that. I don't foresee a whole lot further breakdown in basis. Maybe that starts to put a little pressure on canola basis for some of those folks that have now narrowed the gap between those two commodities. It's not nationwide at this point. Again, it's in just a couple of markets, particularly west of the Rockies, but I think it's a good sign for the rest of us, and we could start to see that fan out over the rest of the country in the coming weeks here. And I think another one, and we talked about this post-report last week, but the cotton acres being higher than they were last year, I think the total acres is going to be about 104% of what we had in the ground last year. And the important piece being an opportunity to return to normal yields in the Texas Panhandle and New Mexico, and for California to get a lot of that flooded out ground back into production. Those will reduce demand on the Southeast, which did see increased acres, which was in kind of direct conflict for what everybody was anticipating pre-report. I think we were expecting another cut to southeastern acres, but they're up, return to normal production in the western half of the country. I think we have a real chance of taking another $50, $75 a ton off of new crop cotton seed by the time we get there. Shoot, if you start to trim up rail freight values a little bit, take some fuel surcharge out of it, we could slide even further yet. Now, crude's working against us on that front, but I think there's significant room to improve on that.
Okay, good deal. And you just mentioned crude there at the end, and that is something that we have to watch closely as well. We brought up the U.S. dollar with Cody and talking about the export factor. Crude has been in a really gentle uptrend, if you will, over the past, let's say, 3 or 4 months now. It's been very steady, but we have been starting to hit the upper ends of that channel, quietly pushing into the mid 80s now, right? So we were kind of, for a while comfortable in the 70s. We kept telling folks, keep an eye on $80 a barrel for crude. Now we're in the mid 80s. We had some volatility, I think, injected into that market again in the Middle East earlier this week. So providing some strength, I think we need to keep an eye on that as well, because if you start to break out of that channel, you're looking at something around $90 a barrel potentially. And that's first week of April, right? So usually we think of our energy demand season for crude. You think of that big summer driving window, Memorial Day to Labor Day, when school's out. Families are hitting the roads here across America. Energy prices start to kind of ramp up a bit. So we need to keep an eye on that one too. So we'll keep the U.S. dollar and crude oil, let's say, on the back burners for the time being. You brought up cottonseed, Jake. Thank you for that. Because a lot of folks, I think, are asking about it because a lot of their vendors are starting to push folks on getting some new crop cottonseed bought. And you've been very clear of, if the number's super attractive to you, that's fine. Maybe get a small portion, but let's also try to stay patient on that cottonseed number because of the reasons you just mentioned. And I think that was maybe one of the more interesting parts of the prospective planting report, was a couple of those interesting pops in some of the cotton acreage. And then you also brought up our sloppy wet weather here in Chicago that you have joyously experienced first half of this week. That conversation has changed a lot, hasn't it? And I was out in Sioux Falls, South Dakota here a couple weeks ago. Cody and I were together in Florida at the Dairy Exchange maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And both of those events, everyone was talking about dryness, and that was dryness a big concern? Not necessarily yet, perhaps because it's also been warm. Maybe folks will get out there and prep some fields earlier, maybe even plant earlier, depending on where they were. I think the moisture factor has changed fairly dramatically now over the past week. Now, again, does it mean the drought has been solved? No. I think west of the Mississippi, all of our friends in, Iowa, Missouri, parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, they can continue to want and use more water if it comes. I think east of the Mississippi, though, it's turned pretty interesting because Illinois, most of it now appears to have no real drought coverage on that drought map. Same with Indiana. I think where, Cody, you are up in Michigan. I mean, that storyline has changed a bit. So we went from really worried, not super worried, but because, again, depends on where you are about that dryness situation, to the last week has done wonders for a decent amount of the acreage here in the U.S. And one could wonder, following this acreage report we had 1 week ago, that at least pulling one of those factors out of the bullish element of this market is why we've returned maybe corn pricing to where we were. And we're also seeing protein pricing, remain under some serious pressure as well. So we covered a lot. There was a lot to cover. But I think before we go, is it the Final Four this weekend?
I think so.
It is.
Right. So we have received dozens, if not hundreds, of emails this week saying, hey, Jim, whoever your guests are this week. And I responded, it's Cody and Jake. And they said, who do they have left in their brackets and how are they doing so far? So do you have anyone left in your bracket for the Final Four? How have you guys done?
Pretty bad.
I do not. I had Michigan State winning it all, and that did not play out very well. I was going to put Kansas State in there, but I don't think they made the tournament this year.
Yeah. So Cody, you are not supposed to write in teams. So you can't write in Kansas State.
Go Jayhawks.
Someone that's already picked teams that are in the tournament that actually played.
So I can't write in Kansas State Jayhawks. Go Bears. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I can't write that, I don't think.
Okay.
Do you have any teams in the Final Four?
I do not.
So if you had picked Purdue to beat UConn in the championship, you might have a couple teams left.
You have 2 teams left?
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
It's easy when you pick the favorites all the way through the bracket, Cody. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Good for you.
I had a few. I had the Wisconsin Badgers going this far, and that didn't pan out. Right. I had Marquette going fairly far as well. Not trying to please our Wisconsin contingent necessarily,
Right.
but I had them go and a little disappointed. But yeah, if Purdue beats UConn, you're going to have a happy grain feed host.
Boiler up.
Boiler up, as they might say. Okay, guys, can we just get a bold prediction on who's going to win the NCAA tournament?
It's UConn.
Oh, just matter of fact.
I'm going to
Cody.
say UConn by 20 points.
Wow.
Cody.
All right. I was going to say Purdue by 5, but
yes, that's what I need. That's what we need, baby. Yeah, boiler up, dude. Boiler up. Okay, gentlemen. Well, we appreciate your insights today. Excellent work. A big thanks to Cody for returning to the show. And viewers, you know him already, but tune in to Tech Talk every week with him and Andy Fallman on their YouTube series. Cody, how many is it subscribers that we're aiming for?
Yes, subscribers at this point. I was told by higher ups, if we
Big wigs.
the
big wigs,
10,000 subscribers, I am going to be sent on a rocket to the moon. So
okay,
I am pretty
Good
excited about that. Phil has promised full expenses paid, shot to the moon, and a trip back, round trip.
Well,
maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
So we're close. We're getting there.
Paige, can we confirm with Paige, who's on at the moment? Are we close to 10,000? She's saying we are getting very close. She's very shaking close. Her head, but I'm interpreting it as
I can read her lips. It says we're close.
She's saying we're getting there.
A couple more.
There's a chance. If you could just take a moment, subscribe to the YouTube series. You can go to the Everag page. We've got a plethora of shows to choose from. We've got the Grain Feed, of course, Tech Talk. We have Pasture to Pen. You name it. There are myriad opportunities to tune into the media channel. So please like and subscribe. And that being said, that's because of all the hard work from the Everag Insights crew and all their support. So thank you. Thank you to Paige for her production magic.
Shout
out. Thank you to viewers for watching the Grain Feed. Contact information is on the screen. We greatly appreciate your feedback. That's all for today. We'll see you next time on the Grain Feed.